Spencer Oliver, in his interview with, well, it wasn't really an interview, it was more a podcast kind of, round table kind of thing with Duke McKenzie, said that, I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said it would be better for boxing if Tyson Fury defeats Oleksandr Usyk in December. Now, I gave my 2 cents on that. I talked a bit about what Duke McKenzie was saying and how Simon Jordan, in his usual ways, was picking Fury based upon, yeah. But it was an interesting one, and it's one that you could conceivably think about. Now, I know I touched on it briefly in the video I did on it, but I kind of want to elaborate on it further because it is an interesting thought. And him basically saying that Tyson Fury defeating Oleksandr Usyk is better for boxing. Now, I said in the video I did that I felt that, yeah, possibly, and genuinely, yeah, possibly in the short term, it is because, well, we know Tyson Fury, he's a massive star in the UK, as of course is Anthony Joshua. Oleksandr Usyk is certainly no stranger to the UK market, but, Oleksandr Usyk is not a massive star in the UK in that sense. You're not going to have, and no disrespect, his English is getting better and it's good enough. He knows he certainly understands what he's saying sometimes. But he's not going to be on, Graham Norton or something like that, like Tyson Fury, The Chase, like Joshua Fury could potentially be on if they haven't already, I don't know. But you know that they get eyes on the sport, they get people talking, and obviously the fight that everyone in the UK, probably everyone in boxing, maybe not even the UK, the majority of people in boxing want is obviously Fury versus Joshua. It's not going to generate the kind of money it would have generated back in 2021 when they were both, well, Joshua wasn't undefeated, but he was unified champion. He'd avenged that sole loss to Andy Ruiz. It's never going to be what it was then. It's just not going to happen. But would it still be a big fight if it got made for next year? It absolutely would. So do I agree in the short term Fury winning would be better for boxing? I can honestly say it probably would. Now, I know some people are going to counter that argument and say, but gee, how could it be better for boxing in the short term or in the long term? Because we know what Tyson Fury is like. We know that when he was WBC champion and when he didn't have any mandatory obligation, and remember, Dylan White was waiting a long time for that mandatory, saying that he was waiting a long time, he lost it, he regained it, it took a while for him to get that mandatory shot. When he finally cleared that mandatory, whether the WBC haven't called another mandatory since, it's been over 2 years. And there's no mandatory. So that's not good. It meant that Fury, before the Saudis got involved, had carte blanche to duck Oleksandr Usyk, move the goalposts. He was able to fight Francis Ngannou. He was able to shamelessly take a trilogy with Derek Chisora. Is that good for boxing? And I would say, of course not. Of course it's not good for boxing. But counter-argument is the Saudis weren't involved. Because Fury was in a roundabout way on a victory lap, I think, trying to make as much money as he could for little risk. Now the Saudis have come in and they're going to pay him as much money as they can, as much money as he feels he's worth, and they're willing to say, okay, but here's the thing, they're not going to let him take little risks. Do you think if Tyson Fury beats Oleksandr Usyk, Turki Al-Sheikh is going to accept Tyson Fury having a fight with John Jones, having a fourth fight with Deontay Wilder? Again, I'm not saying he will, but hypothetically, he's not going to accept that. No way. He'll basically not figuratively speaking, he'll basically be putting a gun to his head saying, you're fighting Anthony Joshua, or you're fighting the trilogy with Oleksandr Usyk, etc., etc. And with Tyson Fury, you need to see the way he deals with things, the way he's done things in the past. With Anthony Joshua, the time where he was chomping at the bit, it seemed anyway, to get that fight made, was when he lost to Oleksandr Usyk. And it was the second loss. And it wasn't even just the fact that he lost back-to-back to Oleksandr Usyk. He had that episode in the ring. So, you were getting Joshua at the perfect time. If you had fed him to Daniel Dubois, if you'd fed him to any top-flight heavyweight at that point in his career in 2022, before he had those, rehabilitation fights. And even then, that still didn't fix him. But he would have been just like taking candy from a baby. That was the only time he was ever willing to really take that. Had Daniel Dubois lost to Anthony Joshua and lost convincingly, maybe then we would have a problem, but he didn't. He destroyed Anthony Joshua. So Fury is going to look at that fight like taking candy from a baby. So yeah, in the short term, if they did that fight, the British public would lap it up. They would. They'd love it. Fury, Joshua. They wouldn't. They probably would care that Joshua was coming out the back of a loss. Some would. Some probably wouldn't. But nevertheless, they'd still lap it up. I always said, look at Kell Brook and Mir Khan. That fight was nearly a decade past its sell-by date. And people still lapped it up. We still watched it. Now, that fight right there, especially if there's a world title on the line, that will be like Amir Khan, Kell Brook on steroids and the rest. So people will still watch it. It will get eyes on the sport of boxing. So in the short term, is it a good thing? I hate to agree, but yeah, I genuinely, in the short term, it probably is. You could definitely have that argument. It's a fair, valid argument. In the long term, is it a good thing? Well, what happens if Tyson Fury beats Anthony Joshua and then decides, do you know what? I've done it. I've beaten Anthony Joshua. I've beaten Oleksandr Usyk. I might not be undisputed, but does he really care? Maybe. But if he doesn't, then I worry we would potentially have the proper Fury victory lap. And what I mean by that is then we probably would see him go and maybe look to fight a John Jones, a rematch with Francis Ngannou. These Mickey Mouse fights that nobody asked for, but, they just captivate the casual audience like the Ngannou fight did. If we see that, well then, and that is bad, because then you've an active heavyweight champion of the world who's not defended his title. There's no mandatories being called. And for me, that is bad for boxing. That's not good. That's not what you want. You don't want a heavyweight champion doing that. And it sets a bad precedent for fighters who are, coming through or up and coming, or who are watching that thinking, that's what I'm going to do. If I'm in his position, that's what I'm going to do. So in the short term, yeah, it would get eyes back on the sport. But in the long term, again, there's a lot of ifs and buts. And as I always say, if is a very big word in the world of boxing. I think it would do some damage as well. Now, there's the counter argument. If Oleksandr Usyk wins, is that better for boxing? Or if Tyson Fury loses, is that better for boxing? Certainly I felt first time around it was, because I genuinely thought that if Tyson Fury was to beat Oleksandr Usyk, well then we'd be in a situation where he'd get rid of all those titles, he'd keep the WBC, they'd give him carte blanche to do whatever he wants, and we'd be back to where we were in 22, 23, where, we might see a mandatory, and even then, how good a mandatory is it going to be? We're going to see a pointless trilogy fight with Derek Chisora, or that level of fighter, a rematch with Otto Wallin, God forbid, and then we get, sold this, baggy that, the fight to make is Ngannou, a guy who'd never had a professional boxing match in his life, was in the wrong side of 30, and had made his name in a completely different form of combat sport. I don't want to go back to that, especially when there was a chance to, make some good fights. I don't want to go back to that. I thought we might go back to that. And I thought that would be a step backwards for boxing. Now, if Fury loses to Oleksandr Usyk and Oleksandr Usyk wins and, retains his unified title, well, I can't see it being good for boxing in the short term, but maybe possibly in the long term for two reasons. One, it sets a different precedent for a lot of fighters who are up and coming. Because if you think of it like this, their gold standard, so to speak, and not just for heavyweights, in all the divisions, you'd always say the heavyweight will be the gold standard, that would be the flag bearer. Your heavyweight champion is a guy who never ducks, goes into backyards, as Hatman would say, I'm paraphrasing, but the B-side fighter, the B-side specialist or something like that, he said in a recent video. And a man who never ducks a fight, has made a lot of money, and went out on top with his own intact. Because I think Usyk, if he wins against Tyson Fury, will probably bow out. Probably. Maybe stick around for one against Dubois, maybe, but probably bow out. That's a great figure to look up to. That's a great way. That's a great guide to spearhead the division. For these new up-and-comers, your Atelmas, maybe your amateurs who are going through this cycle. I would rather them look at that as, the gold standard than, well, pick and choose here. I don't have to fight him because of this, or I don't want to fight him because of this. Now the fight's to be made because, no. We've been there, seen it, done it. I don't like it, right? I'd much prefer Oleksandr Usyk's way of it. Also, if he was to win and he was to vacate those titles, it would create a fragment in the heavyweight division. It'd be all over the place, the belts. But I think that that's what's needed in order to usher in this new era. Because you're looking at the likes of Daniel Dubois, who I think is going to be one of the spearheads, Yalalov, Bacoli, Atelma, Richard Torres, people like that, they are the new kids on the block, the new up-and-comers, and I'm sure there's going to be many more. And I think that if those belts become fragmented, become vacant, we could see some fights. We could see some fights with these new generation guys, the Atelmas of the worlds, the Dubois, against maybe some of the old guard. It's incredible to think Joseph Parker is kind of looked at as an old guard now, even though he's only in his early 30s, but he's been around for an awful long time. He fought in a couple of Klitschko undercards back in the day, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that actually would be a good thing. So I can see how in the short term Fury winning is a good thing. It would put more eyes on the sport of boxing, definitely. And again, if Usyk wins in the long term, certainly in the short term, I think that people would kind of look at boxing and they might turn off and this, that, and the other, but only for a short time. And I think give it a year, we'll start to see a snowball effect. I think in the long term it will be better if Usyk wins. But again, a case is to be made for both. Definitely. I'm not going to turn around and say that Fury winning is necessarily bad for boxing. No, I think a case is made that in the short term, if they can do the Joshua fight, certainly, yeah. At the end of the day, it is going to put eyes on the sport of boxing. It's like saying, I don't think, maybe this is a poor example, but the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul thing, I didn't like it. It was a farce. But, crucially, did it put eyes on the sport of boxing? Yeah, it did. Millions and millions. Did it put eyes on some of the undercard fighters, Kay Taylor, Amanda Serrano? Yeah. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No. So, you kind of have to look at it through both eyes, I suppose. You have to look at it through, the black and the white, so to speak. And I get what Spencer Oliver and Simon Jordan are saying with regards to Fury winning, but I think there's an argument to be made that Usyk winning as well is also good for boxing. So, bit of a long one, bit of a one to kind of get the mind thinking. Let me know in the comments what you think. Lads, I hope you enjoyed it. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe as always if you haven't already. And lads, until next time, appreciate you locking in. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. We're getting closer to 21k, lads. 30k, lads. Jesus Christ. Maybe 100k someday will be possible. Who knows? But until then, peace.